Story 1. My name is Aidan Calloway. Back in 2019, I was stationed as a fire lookout in Wyoming's Medicine Bow National Forest. It wasn't a move for my career. It was more of an escape hatch. My divorce had been finalized earlier that same year, and I wanted as much distance as I could get from the mess my old life in Chicago had become. Wyoming seemed about far enough. The job itself was straightforward: monitor the forest, report any smoke or fire, and not much else beyond that. I spent most of my days reading old paperbacks, fixing my crappy meals on a propane stove, and thinking about all the different ways my life had gone wrong. But the solitude was therapeutic. At least it was until the day I heard the screaming. It was the middle of the afternoon, and I was cleaning the cabin's tiny windows when the first shout cut right through the silence. It wasn't a sound you could just dismiss. It was raw, panicked, and it was close. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the tree line down below. Help, somebody. The voice was coming from the east slope, near a popular hiking trail about a mile out. Normally, I would just call this kind of thing in, but the cell reception up there was spotty, and my landline wasn't functioning after a storm had knocked it out a week earlier. The replacement part was coming soon, which probably meant months. I grabbed my gear, a radio, a first aid kit, and the old bear spray canister that came with the cabin. The canister looked like it had been manufactured in the 90s, but I figured it was better than having nothing at all. The forest was dense and shadowed, the air heavy with the scent of pine. As I jogged down the narrow trail, the voice grew louder and sharper. It was a man, and his words became clearer the closer I got. "Stay back." Don't. A wet, guttural sound followed, like someone pouring a bucket of water onto the forest floor. Then there was just silence. I froze, crouched low, every nerve screaming at me to just turn around. But I couldn't. If someone was hurt, it was my job to help, or at least, that's what I told myself. I slowed my pace, stepping carefully over roots and undergrowth. Then I saw it, the body. He was sprawled in a small clearing, wearing a shredded flannel shirt and jeans. His face was pale, his throat slashed wide open. Blood soaked the mossy ground, pooling beneath him. His hand was clutching a small hunting knife, its blade bent. I don't know how long I stood there just staring before I heard the rustle. It wasn't from the body, it came from behind me. Turning slowly, I scanned the trees. A man stepped out. He was barefoot, wearing cargo pants and a sleeveless shirt, his wiry arms covered in strange swirling tattoos. He held a machete at his side, its blade dark with what looked like fresh blood. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice calm and steady. I work here," I stammered. My mind raced, searching for an angle, for some way out. "I can just go." I didn't see anything. He tilted his head, studying me like a hawk sizes up its prey. "No one's supposed to be out here. That's the whole point." The man took a step forward, and I instinctively raised the bear spray. "Don't," he warned. "That stuff won't do a damn thing." He lunged. I let loose the spray, a wide orange mist erupting between us. He staggered back, coughing and rubbing at his face, and I ran. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't care about the trail. I barreled straight through the forest, branches clawing at my arms and my face. The cabin wasn't far, less than a mile away, but every single step felt like an eternity. Behind me, his voice carried through the trees. "You can't hide forever." I burst into the cabin, slamming the door shut and throwing the latch. My hands shook as I grabbed the old rifle hanging above the window. It hadn't been fired in years, but it was loaded, and that was good enough for me. The footsteps came next, crunching on the gravel outside the cabin. I aimed the rifle right at the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The doorknob rattled. "Aidan, right?" His voice was muffled, but it was clear. "I know you're in there. You think that rifle makes you safe?" I didn't answer. "Here's the thing," he continued. "I don't like witnesses." The silence that followed was even worse than the sound of him talking. Minutes passed and I began to wonder if he'd just left. Then the window shattered. glass sprayed across the entire cabin as his machete tore through the frame. I fired the rifle, the deafening blast echoing in the small room. The man cursed, pulling back. I ran to the window and saw him staggering toward the tree line, clutching at his shoulder. "You think this is over?" he shouted, his voice fading as he disappeared into the forest. I stayed inside for hours, just waiting, clutching that rifle like a lifeline. When the sun finally set, I cautiously ventured out, moving carefully toward the trailhead. The man's body was gone, but the blood was still there, dark and sticky on the ground. I reached the nearest ranger station at dawn, my legs burning from the long hike. The rangers called the sheriff, and soon the whole area was swarming with officers and dogs. They found a campsite a few miles from the clearing tents, hunting gear, and a notebook filled with rambling entries about purifying the forest. The sheriff said the man was a known survivalist with a long history of violence. They never found him. I left the job 2 weeks later, turning in my resignation without any explanation. The man's face still haunts me, but not because of the fear. It's the certainty in his voice, the way he spoke, as if killing was just a duty. Some people don't need monsters in the woods to be terrifying. They are enough all on their own. Asterisk story 2. I was crouched behind a dense thicket of Sitka spruce, rain soaking right through my gear, thinking about the peanut butter sandwich I'd crammed into my pack. This was back in 1987, and I was a few miles deep into the Tongazes National Forest in southeastern Alaska. My name is Elias Turner, a Green Beret on a training mission that had taken a very sharp turn into something far less controlled. It told us these exercises were designed to simulate worst-case scenarios. I don't think they ever imagined this. 2 days earlier, our team had been dropped into the forest with just basic survival gear and orders to navigate a treacherous route over 72 hours. We were paired up for safety, but I lost my partner, Joel Bishop, when he went to scout a route through a ravine and never came back. He had the map. I had a compass and a sense of optimism that was rapidly dwindling. By the time dusk settled, I had found Joel's pack near a stream, torn apart like it had been fed into a wood chipper. There was no sign of Joel himself. It was like the earth had just swallowed him whole. I radioed our handlers using the emergency frequency, but all I got back was static. That was the first sign that something wasn't just wrong. It was deeply, fundamentally broken. The forest here isn't like the places you hike on weekends. It doesn't feel indifferent. It feels alive, like it's holding its breath. Every step I took through the mossy undergrowth came with a subtle shift in the air, like the trees themselves were watching. That night, I climbed up a sturdy tree and strapped myself to it to sleep. I woke up twice, once to the sound of something heavy moving below me, and once to the sharp, unmistakable crack of bones breaking. I didn't go down to investigate. Day 2 began with the kind of cautious optimism that only comes from a good protein bar and the promise of sunlight. I followed the stream downhill, figuring it would eventually lead me to the coastline where our extraction was planned. That's when I stumbled upon the first body. It wasn't Joel. The man was older, probably in his mid-40s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. His face was frozen in a rictus of terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. His chest cavity was caved in, as though something had punched straight through it. His ribcage protruded out like some kind of grotesque bloom. There were no drag marks, no signs of any struggle. Whatever had done this had just left him here, neatly displayed like a warning. I searched his pockets for an ID and found a waterlogged driver's license. Daniel O'Keefe, a local, judging by the address. There was a small hunting knife clipped to his belt, which I took as I turned to leave. I noticed the ground all around him. No animal tracks, no human ones either. It was as if he'd just fallen right out of the sky. By midday, I came across more signs that I wasn't alone. Broken branches, gouges in the tree bark 6 feet off the ground. Scat that smelled wrong, not like bear or wolf, but something rancid, almost chemical. That's when I began marking the trees with my knife. hoping I could at least keep track of where I'd already been. It wasn't until late afternoon that I actually saw it. At first I thought it was another person, maybe someone from a search party. It stood in the shadows of a grove, too far away to make out any details. But it was tall and broad, humanoid in its shape. I called out, but it didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head, a motion that sent a chill straight through me. Then, it stepped forward. Its legs were too long, bending oddly at the joints like a bird's. Its skin was pale and stretched taut, with the texture of rawhide. Its torso was barrel-shaped with sinewy arms that ended in hands that were too large for its body. It carried itself with an unnatural grace, moving like it was gliding over the ground rather than walking. I froze, my hand on my knife. It didn't move any closer. Instead, it crouched down, almost mirroring my own stance. The staring contest felt like it stretched on for hours, though it was probably less than a minute. When I finally blinked, it bolted. No sound, no rustling, it was just gone. By nightfall, I'd found a shallow cave to shelter in, though shelter felt like a real overstatement. I built a fire, keeping it small and feeding it sporadically. The night was eerily silent. Around midnight I heard the first scream. It was high-pitched, sharp, and then it was cut off abruptly. Then another one, farther away, human or animal. I couldn't tell. The next morning I found another body. This one was mangled far beyond recognition. Judging by the gear, it was one of the other Green Berets, maybe Carter or Lee, whoever it was. They'd been torn completely apart. The blood spatter suggested a struggle, but the body was oddly posed, its arms outstretched like a macabre crucifixion. I considered burying him, but the ground was too rocky, and every second I spent standing still felt like an invitation for whatever had done this. I moved on, following the stream again, gripping the hunting knife until my knuckles ached. Around mid-afternoon, I stumbled onto a makeshift camp. There was a small fire pit, still warm, and a pile of supplies. It looked like it had been hastily abandoned. Among the items were three things that made my stomach drop: a blood-stained notebook, a half-eaten granola bar, and Joel's dog tags. I flipped through the notebook. The handwriting was shaky. The words were scrawled as if the writer had been trembling. It described sightings of a creature similar to what I'd seen, and a pattern of attacks. The writer believed it hunted in cycles, stalking its prey for hours, sometimes even days, before finally striking. They called it the Wendigo, though that felt more like a placeholder than a real name. The final entry read, "If you're reading this, it's too late for me. But it's not just one, they're smart. They're working together. Don't run, they like it. When you run..." I stuffed the notebook into my pocket and left the camp, moving faster now, every muscle screaming for me to just sprint. But my brain screaming even louder to keep my pace steady. By late afternoon, the stream widened into a small river, and I spotted the coastline in the distance. That's when I heard it again, the sound of something heavy moving through the forest behind me. It wasn't even trying to be quiet. Branches snapped and the underbrush crackled. It was gaining on me. I gripped the knife, ducked behind a large boulder, and waited. It emerged from the trees, and my breath caught in my throat. This one was different from the first, smaller, wiry, with patches of matted fur clinging to its limbs. Its face was elongated like a coyote's, but its mouth opened wider than it should have, and it was filled with jagged teeth. It sniffed the air, turning its head toward the boulder. I lunged, driving the knife deep into its side. It screamed, a piercing, grating noise that made my ears ring. It thrashed, its claws raking my arm as I tried to pull the knife free. It finally wrenched itself away. It stumbled, blood pouring from the wound. It didn't retreat though, it just circled me, its eyes locked on, gauging its next move. Then from the trees, another one emerged, and then another. 3 in total, each one slightly different, but unmistakably the same species. They moved in sync, spreading out to flank me. My training kicked in, but it felt like trying to apply algebra to a fistfight. I threw a rock at one, Then I bolted for the river. The current was strong, but I waded right in, letting it carry me downstream. The creatures followed along the bank, their long limbs making it easy for them to keep pace. I spotted a fallen log bridging the river and scrambled onto it, slipping on the wet wood. One of them leaped after me, claws outstretched. I ducked, and it overshot, plunging into the water below. The others hesitated, their heads swiveling between me and their struggling companion. I didn't wait to see who they'd choose. I ran. The river led to a rocky cove where a fishing boat was anchored. I shouted, waving my arms wildly. An older man appeared on the deck, squinting. I reached the boat just as the creatures emerged from the tree line. The man's eyes widened and he grabbed a shotgun, firing it twice. The blasts didn't kill them, but it made them retreat, vanishing back into the trees. We didn't talk much as he steered us away from the shore. I told him just enough to convince him to radio the Coast Guard. When we reached the nearest town, I reported everything: the bodies, the creatures, the notebook. They listened politely, and then they quietly suggested I should get some rest. The official report would later list the deaths as the result of a rogue bear attack, but the locals, they knew better. Over beers that night, the fisherman told me about missing hikers, unexplained deaths, and sightings of things that didn't belong in the forest. He called them snow devils and said they'd been around long before any of us. Weeks later, when the military retrieved what was left of the training team, they found Joel's body, or what was left of it. Nearby, they found a pile of bones stripped perfectly clean, arranged in a spiral pattern. The official report didn't mention that detail. I never went back to the Tongases. The fisherman told me he didn't either. We both agreed that some places just aren't meant for people. Story 3. I had been hiking alone for years. Some people found that strange, but I've always preferred the solitude of the trail. It's where I feel the most in control, away from all the noise and the distractions of everyday life. The world just fades out and it's just me in the wild. But if I'm being completely honest, I also like that no one else can see me wrestle with my demons out there. That's something I'm not exactly eager to share. It was the fall of 1997. The air in northern Utah was crisp, and the leaves were turning deep shades of red and orange, a beautiful contrast against the towering pines. I had planned a week-long trek along an isolated stretch of the Uintas, one of my favorite spots because no one else seemed to appreciate just how desolate it was. That's exactly why I loved it. No cell service, no paved roads, just miles of pure wilderness. I had packed enough supplies to last me for 10 days, even though I only planned on being out for 7. You just never know what could happen, especially this time of year. Snow can roll in quickly at high elevations, and being overprepared never hurt anyone, but my first few days on the trail were uneventful, exactly how I wanted them. There was something about the silence that let me reset, like flipping a switch on the chaos that was always buzzing around in my head. I made it to a small alpine lake on the 3rd day where I set up camp. I'd been here before, an isolated little gem hidden away from the more trafficked trails. The lake reflected the surrounding mountains like a perfect mirror, and the cold, clear water was the kind of thing that made you feel truly alive. I spent the afternoon fishing and cooking up a trout over the fire. The night was unusually quiet, too quiet I brushed it off as nerves. After all, I was out here all by myself. But the silence was different. No wind rustling the leaves, no distant calls of any wildlife, just a deep stillness. Then, around midnight, I woke up. Something had changed. The air had shifted. I could hear footsteps outside my tent. Not an animal, though. I know what a bear or a deer sounds like. This was deliberate, slow, and heavy. I lay there, barely breathing. I reached for the hunting knife I always kept under my pillow, gripping it tight, my heart pounding in my chest. The steps stopped just outside the tent, and then there was nothing. I waited, listening for any sign of movement, but it was as if whatever it was had just vanished into the night. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there with the knife in my hand until the first light of dawn peeked through the fabric of the tent. When I stepped outside the next morning, everything seemed normal. My fire had long since burned out, and there were no tracks, no sign that anything had been near me during the night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. I packed up camp and decided to move on. That's when things started getting strange. I hiked for hours that day, deeper into the mountains, hoping to put some distance between me and whatever had been lurking around my camp. By the afternoon, I reached a narrow pass that led into a high valley I had never explored before. The trail was overgrown, barely visible, but that only made it more appealing to me. I always liked finding places that felt untouched, where no one else had been for years. That as I pushed through the brush, I stumbled across an old, weathered signpost. The letters were faded, almost completely gone, but I could just make out the word, Garrison. I had heard rumors about this place, a ghost town hidden somewhere in the Uintas, but no one could ever tell me exactly where it was. Most people thought it was just a story, something the locals made up to scare off outsiders. I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. My only thought was that if I could find this abandoned town, it would make for one hell of a campsite, maybe even something to write about later, a story to tell around a fire. So I pressed on. It took another hour of bushwhacking before I finally saw the remains of a cabin, just a crumbling wooden structure half covered in moss. As I got closer, I realized there were more. Several old buildings, all in various stages of decay, were scattered around the clearing like forgotten relics. It was eerie, but it was also fascinating. I dropped my pack and started exploring. Most of the buildings were little more than piles of wood at this point, but one cabin stood out. It was mostly intact, though the roof had caved in on one side. The door was still hanging on by a single, rusted hinge. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. There were a few pieces of old furniture at a table with one leg broken, a chair tipped over in the corner, and then I saw it, a journal lying on the floor near the hearth. The pages were yellowed with age, but it was still readable. I picked it up, flipping through the entries. It belonged to a man named Jacob Cole. The last entry was dated October 3rd, 1937. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. That was exactly 60 years ago to the day. I read through the last few pages quickly, my heart racing. Jacob Cole had been a prospector living out here in Garrison alone. His final entries were strange, rambling. He wrote about hearing voices, footsteps in the night, and seeing shadows that didn't belong to any living thing. His last words sent a chill down my spine. Whatever it is, it's watching me. I can feel it. I don't think I'm going to make it through the night. I shut the journal, feeling the weight of those words sink into me. Something had happened to him, and now I was standing in the exact same spot, 60 years later. I should have left right then, but something kept me there. A morbid curiosity, maybe, or maybe it was something else. I decided to set up camp in the town. There was a spot just outside the cabin near a half-collapsed barn that seemed flat enough. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then, I'd glance up, expecting to see someone or something standing there. But it was just me, alone in this forgotten place. Night fell quickly and the temperature dropped. I lit a fire and tried to focus on cooking dinner, but my mind kept drifting back to that journal, to Jacob Cole and his final words. The wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the old buildings, making them creak and groan. That's when I heard it again. The footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the camp just like the night before. But this time, they didn't stop. They got closer. I grabbed my knife and stood up, scanning the darkness just beyond the firelight. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. No answer. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and then I saw it, a figure just at the edge of the light, barely visible. It looked like a man, but something was off. He was too tall, too thin, and his movements were unnatural, jerky, like he was being pulled along by invisible strings. I backed up, my heart pounding. The figure took a step closer, and that's when I saw his face, or what was left of it. It was twisted, like it had been stretched or melted, with hollow eyes that seemed to glow in the firelight. I ran. I didn't think. I just grabbed my pack and bolted into the woods, the knife still clutched in my hand. I could hear the footsteps behind me, crashing through the underbrush, gaining on me. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch out, the trees blurring together as I sprinted through the darkness. Eventually, I stumbled, falling hard to the ground, my legs burning with exhaustion. The footsteps stopped. I lay there gasping for breath, waiting for whatever it was to find me. But the woods were silent again, just like the night before. I don't know what it was that I saw that night. I don't think I ever will, but I made it out of those mountains the next day, and I haven't been back since. There's something out there, something that's been watching those mountains for a very long time. Maybe it got Jacob Cole, maybe it's gotten others too, I don't know. But I do know one thing for sure. I was lucky to have made it out alive. Not everyone is.